Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How to Build Your Property's Digital Curb Appeal. In the new world of digital marketing and social media, the impressions of a multifamily community that are created online might be called its digital curb appeal. This factor can be critical to its reputation among prospective residents and a great marketing tool for a community. But as we also know, it's all too easy for these online ratings to create inaccurate impressions that can damage the reputation of the community. In today's webinar, we'll hear how a leading national management and development company developed a special strategy to address these challenges and enhance the digital curb appeal of its properties. Our experts will discuss tips for creating a reputation management strategy, how online reviews impact curb appeal, ways to improve your community's online presence, strategies for creating a consistent online voice, ideas for boosting the number of online reviews, and last, but certainly not least, benchmarking for success. My name is Paul Rasta, and I'm the executive editor of Multi-Housing News and Commercial Property Executive. Joining me today are two top professionals who will be our expert guides on these issues. Emma Cook is a digital marketing specialist at Gene B. Glick Company, an Indianapolis-based multifamily investor and management company that celebrated its 70th anniversary just last year. Glick manages upward of 20,000 units in 13 states. Also joining us today is George Ledoux, the Senior Sales Director for Binary Fountain. Based in McLean, Virginia, Binary Fountain is a leading online reputation management platform that provides services to the multifamily owners and managers, healthcare organizations, and a variety of small and medium-sized businesses. Binary Fountain's multifamily specific solution, Social Compass, provides organizations with a complete view into managing resident feedback from online ratings and reviews, surveys, and social media sites. It continuously mines feedback for sentiment, uncovering timely, actionable insights. Its management tools help turn these insights into an opportunity to increase engagement, manage reputation, drive revenue, and improve the resident experience. Emma, George, great to have both of you with us today. Now, this is an interactive program, so I want to encourage everyone in the audience to submit your questions to the panel. After the presentation, our panelists will answer as many of your questions as time permits. Now, if we run out of time before we get to your question, or if your question is confidential, Emma and George will be happy to follow up with you after today's session. Also, we'll be archiving today's webinar, so if you missed any part of today's program or just want to hear a particular section again, you can go back and listen as often as you like. Well, we've got a lot to cover today, so without further ado, let's dive right in. George, let's start with you. Would you please give us some context on the role of online reviews?
Thank you, Paul, for the kind introduction there, and thank you to those who have joined us on the call today. For today's discussion, the webinar is really going to be focused on that digital curb appeal, as Paul had mentioned, and as you guys had read in the description signing up for this webinar. So I wanted to take a moment and really just discuss what is that, right? What does that mean? And typically curb appeal is that initial reaction and first impression leading to an individual to want to explore more and see what's inside. So come on in, everyone. But in all seriousness, we're no longer in a world where newspaper ads or bulletin boards or billboards or physical advertisements are nearly as effective as they once were. And residents, where are they going? They're going to the internet first when searching for an apartment, and 72% of consumers or residents using that avenue as that initial source to go to. And this is where that curb appeal starts. Hence the emphasis on digital being key to this discussion. So given that a quick online search of your apartment is when that first impression will come into play, digital needs to be an asset and not a liability, right? Which is a lot of cases we see any type of property management organization or Can you hear me now? Sorry about that, everyone.
Yeah,
A little audio issue there. So jumping back into it, right, the idea is that digital is important. It needs to be an asset. It can't be a liability, so it's important to pay attention to this. And what we tend to find is that part of this digital curb appeal and that first impression are the ratings and reviews that a resident might quickly uncover when doing this type of search for their next apartment. Where will they be living? So when I do a Google or Bing search for apartments near me, or search for a specific apartment by name, on the first page of that search results, and even in the Google Map Pack, will be that star rating. So that is a very important piece of that digital resident journey in looking for an apartment. So curb appeal, right, is taking an initial barrier, passing through that. Digital curb appeal, and part of that barrier are those star ratings and reviews. So if you can get past that initial barrier, you've entered into that consumer or residence selection phase. Hence, note the statistic on the right, 70% of residents are choosing to visit an apartment with a better online reputation. Again, digital needs to be an asset, not a liability. You can't be afraid of these online ratings and reviews. You're a star rating as a property manager or a property management company. We need to position this to be an asset to us, knowing that it is a very important piece to the search. So a natural next question might be, okay, well, where is it important to have strong online ratings and reviews? Well, let's take a look at where residents are going to leave their feedback or leave online reviews. And there's all this talk in the industries of these different ILSs, right? It really wasn't a big discussion point back in 2012, but 6 or 7 years later, here we are. And since then, we now have more and more of these sites out there, and more than 20 that are specific to multifamily where your properties might be listed. And even the more progressive apps and sources out there, like a Zillow or HotPads, are considering or have it in their roadmap to roll out ratings and reviews. So it gets a little confusing and overwhelming with all these sites out there, and you have to start somewhere. So typically a good indicator of where to start is, let's look at the data. Let's not just think what might be best out there. Let's look at hard, concrete numbers. So for our client base here at Binary Fountain, specific to multifamily, when we take a look at some of the property management groups that are using our platform, we found in the trailing 12 months that 50% of all online reviews that we're pulling into the dashboard are being left on Google, right? And this is the trailing 12 months. Consider the second source as apartment ratings at a little above 18%. That's a major transition from what we've seen in previous years. Even with those programs in place that are driving traffic to these ILSs, Google seems to be becoming that more prominent source out there, and really the source of truth. And further, if you look at some of the statistics of where a consumer might go in the US when they're doing a search, they're typically going to Google. And we find that on a desktop, about 78% of all consumers are using Google, followed by Bing at 14%, Yahoo at 5%. Well, let's go to mobile, because we know that mobile is that tool that a lot of residents are utilizing to really take a look at any type of search, right? So I'm going to get on my phone and search something. Over 90%, 90.82% of consumers in the US are using Google as their search engine, drastically falling off to Yahoo at 6.8, Bing just over 1%. So again, I think it's important to really hone in on that Google source. And I'm going to go back to it, right? The Google Map Pack, as you all see, right? If you do a search for apartments near me, what's going to come up? A listing of different apartments, right? And their star ratings. That's going to be the first thing that you're going to see, and their location, right? Their proximity to where you are. And there's even a star rating filter that Google's introduced on this map pack. So if I don't want to look at anything under a 3.5, okay, I'm going to quickly filter that. I'm not even going to consider anything under 3.5. So again, very important to hone in on this. And that's really about that initial reaction to your apartment, that curb appeal, right? That first impression, that's where this comes in. And of course, a consumer might do their diligence. But again, curb appeal is specifically about that initial reaction to solicit a positive response. So let's do a quick exercise. Everyone on the call, close your eyes for a second. Okay. No one probably closed their eyes, but that's okay. We could still do this exercise. So I'm driving through a neighborhood and I see a nice 3-story brick home with large bay windows, a large wraparound porch, beautiful landscaping. Great. I want to look inside. That's great curb appeal. Now put this neighborhood, or excuse me, this house in a neighborhood full of maybe split level homes with overgrown weeds and everything. Well, if that house was in that neighborhood, it becomes even more appealing. And alternatively, let's take this nice home, that initial one that I was speaking about with strong curb appeal. What if we put this in a high-end neighborhood with houses twice the size, gated entrances, fountains? Well, the curb appeal of that initial home, it might not be as strong as I had originally believed. So curb appeal is very relative, which is why understanding the competition is a very critical component when it comes to digital curb appeal. You know, in the digital setting, right, if I have a 3.9, that home that we think is so great, and we're satisfied with it, well, what if the competition, all those neighboring homes, are a 4.8? Well, okay, it's a relative metric, right? I'm more inclined to take a look at the 4.8 versus the 3.9. And of course, the volume of reviews is also an important item that make up this, right? And I think that the credibility of any type of listing out there that has much more feedback, higher volume of feedback, as opposed to 1 or 2 pieces of feedback, is also part of that curb appeal. So let's talk for a second about, why is that initial reaction so important? Well, if you don't solicit that positive feeling in that first impression, you're going to significantly decrease the option or the probability of that lead coming through the top of your funnel. So that resident, they might not request that appointment or visit your apartment or request a quote based on that initial curb appeal, that initial reaction. So curb appeal, it's really about that top of the line funnel growth. And Emma, in a moment, will talk about the low-hanging fruit of improving online reviews and curb appeal, your online presence there. But I did want to mention that it is very important to consider the internal operations here. What are these consumers saying when they're leaving online reviews? Let's identify those negatives, let's track the trends, and let's put programs into place or initiatives to try to resolve those current negative themes. Getting ahead of this, right, and that next resident that comes through the door and experiences living in your community, well, they're going to have more positive things to say. They're not going to say these negative things that were currently or reoccurring over and over and over again. So it's systemically changing to improve your online presence. That's a big piece, right? And another story, right, is conversion. Curb appeal, feeding the top of the funnel, but that conversion is a completely different aspect of this, right? And I think that this is where you really want to get a good understanding of those internal operations and what are your strengths as an organization that you can promote. So again, a step beyond that curb appeal to really drive the revenue and drive that lead through the funnel, ultimately to signing that lease or renewing with you. And if you really want to hone in on those differentiators of your community against the competition, let's not just benchmark by that star rating, but let's benchmark by what specifically differentiates us from an operations standpoint about our community. Do we speak about the amenities? Do we speak about the parking? Do we speak about the security, the management? What specifically should we hone in on against the competition to differentiate us and ultimately drive that consumer or resident to moving forward with us as their selection for living in our community, right? So in summary, those differentiators with some type of data backing that, and not just, oh, we looked at their pool, it's not as nice as ours, or, oh yeah, their parking's difficult. Let's look at the data. Let's look at some of these online reviews. Let's look at consumer feedback of the competition around us and identify what are those positives and promote those as much as we can to have that significant impact on that conversion rate. So if anyone wants any type of follow-up conversations about how our clients and partners are going about this, we're happy to entertain that and how these clients are ultimately driving more revenue. But on that note, I did want to bring it back to digital curb appeal and hand it over to Emma to really discuss how Glick has been able to improve their digital curb appeal.
Thanks so much, George. As Paul mentioned, I'm the Senior Digital Media Specialist at the Gene B. Glick Company. We are a privately held real estate ownership and development firm with more than 20,000 units in 13 states, with our home office based in Indianapolis. We were founded in 1947 and celebrated our 70th anniversary last year. The company's philosophy, built to be home, is reflected through our industry leadership in customer service, property management, and quality construction of affordable and market rate apartment homes. The company has a long tradition of giving back in the communities that we operate in through our corporate social responsibility efforts, including our Glick Gives and our Glick Cares program. Let's dive into the topic at hand today, building digital curb appeal. Resident experience has always remained a high priority at Glick. However, we were finding that our online reviews didn't really reflect that. We understood the importance of the reviews in our digital curb appeal, and we were really concerned about the feedback that we were receiving not accurately reflecting our dedication to the residents' experience. I mean, let's face it, it's really easy to remember to leave feedback when something goes wrong, but we needed to find a way to solicit feedback from our happy long-term residents too. It was with this objective in mind that our marketing team implemented a company-wide reputation management strategy with the support of our leadership team. The first step to improving our online presence was to find a solution to assist us with managing our reputation. With over 100 apartment communities and a small digital marketing team, it was imperative that we found a tool that could quickly notify us when online reviews were being posted and help us easily and effectively collaborate on responding. It was also really important that we found a tool that had reporting that would help us track the progress and uncover resident experience trends and allow us to benchmark ourselves against our competitors. After a lengthy solution review process, we selected Social Compass since it met all of our needs. Initially, our goal was just simply to respond to all reviews promptly. We really wanted our on-site teams to get comfortable with hearing what was being said about their communities and learning how to respond appropriately online. Next, we focused on trying to increase our positive review volume by looking for touch points to ask our residents and prospects to leave us feedback when we know we got things right, while continuing to focus on the service recovery aspect for the reviews that were less than stellar. In order to really focus on soliciting positive reviews, our marketing team created a We Are Listening campaign, where employees were incentivized to ask residents and prospects to leave an online review for their community. We really encourage our on-site teams to look for opportunities to ask for reviews, whether that's in person, through email, or online. To support them in their efforts, we created feedback pages and added them to each of their community websites. These pages link directly to their property-specific review sites on Google, Apartment Ratings, and Facebook. Some examples of times that we encourage our teams to ask for a review include at a community event, at a lease renewal, after a maintenance request is completed, after a property tour, when a resident refers a friend to live in your community, or when a resident picks up a package from the office. Ideally, we just encourage them to look for opportunities when you know that your residents are pleased with you and use those to your advantage. A couple of items to note on this: do not send residents to Yelp to leave you a review. Their policies really discourage review solicitation, so it's best just to let that happen very organically and not to mention it. You also want to make sure that you're not asking your residents or prospects to leave you a review when they're in your office. Many of the review sites track your IP address, and having several reviews from the same address is often seen as fraudulent. It's also worth noting that while we incentivized our employees to request reviews, we do not offer any incentives to leave a review for our community. So each month that our communities received 3 or more positive reviews, they were entered into a drawing. The winning community won a prize of a team lunch or a dinner out with their leadership team, along with a monetary prize. From the marketing perspective, we really try to promote the positive reviews by highlighting them whenever possible, through email communications on the campaign, through our internal social media platform, and in person whenever possible. The campaign has been really successful as a way to motivate our staff to participate and really take ownership of their reputation. And we've seen an increase in staff morale and an enhanced focus on creating a better resident experience as a result. As a result of our We Are Listening campaign, we saw an increase in online reviews that helped provide us with a more comprehensive picture of our resident experience. In addition, the increase of positive reviews helped to offset the impact that our negative reviews had. Social Compass has been a vital piece of our reputation management efforts, as it's made it really quick and easy for our teams to log in and respond to reviews all in one place. The reporting is also great because it allows us to quickly and easily track our efforts and report on them each month. One of the biggest challenges that we face during our campaign is working with our property managers to draft responses to negative reviews. Many of the responses that were being sent for approval to post were lengthy and inconsistent in voice, and at times it was really clear that they were taking negative reviews personally. Many of our property managers have worked at their communities for years, some even decades, and they really truly care about their residents. So this issue wasn't really surprising, but it caused a lot of delays in posting responses, and we spent a lot of time, discussing what had occurred rather than dealing with the consequences. This issue, paired with the large increase in the number of reviews we were receiving as a company, led us to partner even further with Social Compass and take advantage of their Manage Engagements feature. The ability to efficiently collaborate and edit responses with Social Compass helped our marketing team create appropriate responses faster with a more consistent voice. It was really important to us that that our teams didn't lose sight of what was being said about them online. So even though now they aren't manually going in and drafting responses to reviews, they're still notified of every review that comes in, as well as what response is being posted on their behalf. Glick's management is really hands-on when it comes to resident experience. With Social Compass's alerts, our teams have been able to gain transparency into on-site service recovery. This made their jobs managing customer success easier. Through these communications, they recognize staff for good work and improved customer interactions. One of my favorite perks of being super responsive to online reviews is the fact that several customers go in and delete their old negative reviews, or they update their star rating or review comments as a result of our follow-up. I think that a lot of times residents just want to be heard, and once they realize that they are heard and we're willing to work out whatever's going on, they're happy to delete or update their review. Glick consistently focuses on measuring progress against the program goals. As a result of its online reputation management initiative from 2016 to 2017, our key performance indicators showed that reviews increased 84%, overall experience score improved 3.7%, and our response rates boosted 72%. So we're really pleased with the campaign, and it's something that's a continual thing for us, but it's been great to see how it's impacted our online scores and the number of reviews we've received. With that, I'm going to hand the presentation back over to George.
Great job, Emma, and thank you for providing that overview. Again, encourage those to keep posting questions. We've had a few come through that we'll get to. Before we go into some of the Q&A, I did want to point out that you can download the PDF version of Glick's case study on Binary Fountain's website. Share it with your teams, read through it. We really hope that this case study will help you improve your team's marketing efforts, improve that digital curb appeal. We'll also send out a link after the presentation. You can access the ebook again by visiting the website and going under the case studies link under the resources tab at the top of the homepage. And beyond that, we also have a few different ebooks that I think might be very helpful for this crowd joining the webinar today. The ebook, The Comprehensive Guide to Managing Review Platforms, is a great one to really learn how to properly and efficiently manage those reviews from third-party review platforms, as well how to claim your listings, and really improve the marketability of your properties overall. Again, that digital curb appeal We'll certainly, again, send the link after the presentation. And if you go to Binary Fountain's website, go into the resources tab, there's a whole ebook section where you can kind of dig through and find one that might interest you. We'll also be at OpTech. For those of you that might be attending next month, make sure to stop by our booth. You see the number here, 1006. We'd love to speak with you more about our resident experience analytics platform, or just best practices in the industry in terms of trying to improve that digital curb appeal. A few different aspects there. I believe that we're going to be across from the food, or where the buffet is. So if the line's too long, feel free to come over. We'll entertain you for a few minutes, but certainly would love to have a discussion with any of you that might be attending there.
Great. Well, thanks very much to both of you, Emma and George, for that highly informative and insightful presentation. And we're about to start the Q&A portion of the webinar. But before we go on, I just want to mention to our audience that you may have been experiencing some minor audio difficulties along the way. And if it has been cutting in and out, we apologize. This modern technology has many wonderful qualities, but as we all know, it is not perfect. And I'd like to thank Emma and George for soldiering through for the first part of our webinar, as the sound may have been popping in and out a little bit. So thanks to both of you. So again, I want to encourage those of you who are in the audience to please submit your questions for the Q&A portion if you haven't already. We do have some time for that set aside. And first of all, I'd like to bring up a point that I believe might have been part of your presentation, Emma. And it might have been one of those moments when your sound was cutting out a little bit, but would you do me a favor and review that list of best times to request for reviews? I believe that was part of your presentation. What have you found to be the most effective time to ask your residents for their reviews?
Yeah, absolutely. Typically, I just say whenever you can tell that your residents are pleased with you, but some specific times that I think that's true is at a community event, at a lease renewal, after a maintenance request is completed, after a property tour, after a resident refers a friend to live in the community, when your resident picks up a package from the office, just any touch point really where you were able to provide a good service and you can tell they were pleased with you.
Okay, and just to follow up on that with you, Emma, if I could, would you tell us a little bit about the online review statistics that you are tracking? Which ones are really top of mind for you? And what can you tell us about that? What are the stats that you are tracking right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like George was mentioning, which review sites are the top ones. We use statistics to help us really focus on which ones. I mean, there's so many out there, but what ones to really focus on. So our focus has been Google apartment ratings and Facebook primarily. And we try to track the number of positive reviews overall, as well as our scores as they specifically relate to those three sites.
And to add a little bit more color, one of the things that we've seen our clients do beyond tracking those KPIs is if you are reaching out and having some type of means where you can track the outreach to see how the efficacy, see how successful a campaign might be, or a text message that is sent, tracking conversion rate and the approach there. The positioning when you ask someone to leave an online review, there's a few different ways to do it. Certainly have some best practices, but through some A/B testing, just seeing, which messaging was most effective, what got the most conversion rate, if you will. Those types of KPIs can be very, very effective to really formulating the best type of response or question or positioning to send out to your resident population.
And speaking of tracking, George, that gives us a nice transition into our next question, which is about tracking the competition. And the question is, we keep track of our competitors. Can we track their reviews with Social Compass? Could you address that?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a few different areas where we talked about benchmarking against the competition. That overall star rating across all review sites is important, or focusing on one specific review site is equally important. Let's take the case of Google, right? How does our star rating compare to the competition? Certainly something you can do within the Social Compass dashboard, but I think the value is really identifying specifically the content of the reviews. So yes, you can keep track of the competitors' reviews that are coming into the system across many, many different review sites. But we also take it a step further, right, and analyze that type of feedback that's coming into the dashboard, where you can even benchmark down to a specific operational category and identify what are your strengths and weaknesses against that competitor in a given operational category as it pertains to the resident experience. And by having this information, this data-backed information at your fingertips, think about what you can do with that. From a competitive landscape, you can identify, well, what type of new marketing content could we potentially push out to the potential resident population around us to promote our positives against the, again, competitors' weaknesses, or maybe putting in a leasing manager's hands that data so they can identify, or whoever's doing a property walkthrough, so they can identify and speak to your strengths as a community against the competition's weakness with data, right? With public data, where if a consumer were to fact check you and do a search online, well, that's accurate information. And that goes back to improving that conversion rate. So certainly competitive benchmarking is important. And at Social Compass, we really try to automate that within the dashboard. Great question.
Now, Emma, here's one for you. And it has to do with the sort of management of your reputation management campaign. And our audience member wants to know, what do you believe was the key trigger to motivate your on-site staff to follow through with your reputation management campaign? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so the first step of our campaign was just getting them used to hearing what was being said about them. We didn't really have them do much else at first, and I think that kind of put some fuel under them as far as, hey, not everyone feels that way. You know, we have a lot of residents who've lived here forever, or they liked hearing the positive feedback and they wanted more of that. So I think that some of it was just naturally driven by hearing the feedback they were receiving. And then the other big component that has really made the campaign a success is the buy-in from our leadership teams. When a review comes in for one of our communities, it's not just the marketing department who is reading it. It's, the property manager, their regional manager, their vice president. This is something that has the entire company has bought in on. So, when they get a good review, they're getting acknowledged for their work, from the top down. So I think that's also been a really great driving force for us. And from the marketing team's perspective, the way that we got the buy-in was, using these statistics, some of the ones that George mentioned, as far as, who's reading these reviews, how many people are using them when they search for an apartment, what does that impact on our revenue? So really getting that buy-in, I think, was a huge portion of the success that we've seen.
Thank you for that. And our next question has to do very specifically with reviews themselves. And so I'll bring it up to both of you on the panel. And the question is, can we remove pictures from Google reviews?
Yeah, happy to give it a crack. So the question was about someone leaving a picture in a Google review. There are ways that you can report this back to Google. For whomever had asked that question, maybe we take that offline and discuss a little bit more about the issue that you're potentially facing and how to raise that issue with a given review site, specifically in the case I think you had mentioned Google. So we can definitely talk about that. There's also, just as a side note, that picture when someone does a search on Google and those images, that's very important as part of that digital curb appeal to make sure that you have those pictures up to date, best representing your properties. We've seen some horror stories in terms of some very pictures that weren't the best out there for a given property when you search that property and what comes up on Google. So as part of that digital curb appeal, again, it's important to focus on those images and photos as well. But for the question specific to if someone's leaving a photo in a review, definitely reach out. We could take that one offline, discuss a little bit more about how to approach Google with something like that.
Thank you, George. And again, thanks to all of you in the audience who are asking all these good questions. Keep them coming. And our next question for the panel is, what are some tips to address the issues in a negative review without sounding defensive?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I think that one thing that's really big is just thanking them for taking the time to leave feedback and not countering, every negative component of the review. We always really encourage them to take the conversation offline. So where it's easy to sit there and address every line of what's being said, hey, thank you for taking the time to leave us feedback. We take this feedback really seriously and we want to improve. Do you mind giving us a call at, and then putting the phone number. So the biggest thing I think is just not falling for addressing each thing. And I think sometimes it's better if they're specifically addressing a concern with one person, not having that one person respond, having someone who's, a step away from the emotions involved in it, helping you draft a response. I think that's really key also.
I would agree on all of those approaches. I think that even if from a property manager's perspective, let's just say they're the one that's crafting a response and publicly putting something out there, there's a few reasons why you might want to get defensive. I mean, the resident might be blowing something out of proportion. We've seen that many, many times, right? I'm sure everyone on the phone has. Well, it's easy to say you're making everything up. It's not the best look for the next resident getting online to see that type of defensive nature. So it is a great idea to try to take that offline. Another reason you might want to be defensive is just for other areas of the organization to kind of see that this resident was making it up. It's kind of embarrassing, right, to get a negative review. But I think that having that understanding and a policy at an organizational level of trying to take the conversation online without getting defensive and having the understanding all the way up to management that not every review might be an accurate representation of that community is also something to keep in mind. So if you can create a community internally in your organization and that culture and understanding that online reviews might not always be accurate, it's okay, right, to have some of those out there that might be false and really try to take it offline, resolve it, and hopefully that resident goes back and updates that, or as Emma stated earlier, changes the star rating or even completely removes it, right? That's the goal. That's what you're trying to do here.
Great. Thank you both very much for those comprehensive answers to that challenge. Here's our next audience question. Reviews and social media change so often. What is a reliable source to see the most up-to-date statistics on numbers of users using the various social media, I'm assuming?
So I think that just if you set up a program where you can track these things and track trends over time, it's a great way to do it. I know that Emma said one of the KPIs they look at is where a resident's going to leave feedback and tracking that. If you have some type of automated aggregation system to take a look across all review sites and see what percentage are posting reviews where, that's a great indicator itself, and there's no skewed data there, right? I think that in large part, the other side of it is where are consumers going. There's a lot of good statistics out there, and yeah, you might find some differences between the different sources, but they shouldn't have huge variations from source to source. Make sure that you're looking at a reputable source and looking back at where is this data coming from. Did they survey 100 residents, or did they pull from, or pull thousands of consumers and residents? Is it specific to the multifamily industry? What sites were they talking about? let's look at the actual data of when we talk about that distribution of where residents are leaving feedback, which sites were covered, right? We showed that slide earlier. That's across about 35 online rating review social sites out there, right? It wasn't just honing in on a few. So I think that just taking a step back and trying to understand where did that data come from is probably the important piece to making sure that it's valid and validated information.
Great. Thank you, George. And here's our next question. What communication method have you found to be most successful in getting a resident, getting a resident to post a review? In person, email, text, or anything else?
For us, I think that the biggest thing is making it as easy as possible. So, sending a link to the specific listing, so all they have to do is click on it. Just making it as simple as possible. So yeah, I would say online is huge, but that's going to vary based on person and their comfort level with technology as well.
Yeah, that's very true. And if you think about that, I think a couple of those modalities you mentioned, it's when asking someone for an online review, that's a little awkward to do in person and then just expect them to leave an online review. If you have a great experience and you ask them, hey, do you mind leave us an online review? They may very well say, yeah, of course I will. I'll do that for you. But then things happen, things come up, and you never really get to leaving that online review as a resident. So by making it as easy as possible for them, like Emma had mentioned, giving them the resources to do so, such as a text message or an email with a link in it, can be very effective. From what we've seen with our client base, is text messages by far the most effective way to solicit that for that type of feedback.
George, are you still there? As far as I can tell, we've lost the audio there for a moment. So I guess we will wait for. There you are.
Yeah, no, I'm back.
Okay.
Hopefully you can hear me. That was the conclusion of my response. Maybe it wasn't what you were looking for, Paul.
Well, no, I thought I heard the sound cut out there again for a moment, but hopefully if you've spoken your piece, that's great. So we'll move on to our next question because we've still got quite a few to get to in the time that remains. And I'd just like to remind our audience to keep the questions coming. And even if we don't get to yours during the presentation, please don't be shy about sending it anyway, because Emma and George will be happy to respond to you privately afterward. Now, here's one that I think that both of you might find interesting and challenging to address. Our audience member wants to know, could you give a high-level 2 do's and 2 don'ts when responding directly to online reviews? So again, the audience member wants a high-level 2 do's and then 2 don'ts when you're responding to online reviews directly. How about that? Any thoughts on that?
I can take a stab at it first. I think 2 of the do's that I recommend every time is addressing the reviewer by name when you can. And the second would be thanking them for their feedback, whether it was positive or negative. And then 2 of the don'ts that I would say is don't paste the same response that you've put to everyone else on that review site. You want to make sure that it sounds natural and like you really did hear them and are taking the time to respond. And the other thing would be don't get into a conversation online about it. Do your best to take the conversation offline so that when future prospects or current residents see it, it's not drama. It's not a back and forth argument. It's just stating some facts and, trying to address whatever concerns they might be listing, but doing it in a professional manner.
Okay, great. So the next audience question is also specifically for you, Emma. And so the audience member requested could ask you if you would kindly repeat your reasons for not asking residents to specifically to leave reviews on Yelp.
I'm actually happy to take that one.
Okay.
Unless Emma, you'd like to? Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. Go ahead.
Okay. It's part of what we do here. It's to really stay on top of a lot of these policies and guidelines that these review sites have out there across the board. Yelp is an interesting source out there in the space. They're really one of these sources, and they've put a very strict line in the sand, if you will, when it comes to their policies with not soliciting for customer feedback to their site. And this is even beyond just asking or selectively going after consumers or anything like that. This is in general. So you used to see those signs in restaurants, for example, review us on Yelp. You're not going to see that anymore. That's really against their policy to even in any way influence a consumer or customer to leave an online review on their site. They're really, really trying to take a pure organic approach to everything. The other sites are much more open for you collecting online feedback. But Yelp is one of these sources that, again, has put a very strict policy in place, no solicitation of any kind to their site, even if you're asking, even if you have signage, nothing, right? So that is part of their policies. Happy to share a link with whomever asked that question so you can check out in a little bit more detail what that's all about. And they do have repercussions if you do try to solicit to their site that could negatively impact your listing on that given site.
Great, thank you for that, George. So here's our next audience question. Since Apartment Ratings now makes you pay a yearly fee to respond to reviews, will they still be a lead reputation site moving forward?
Emma, I'll let you respond. I think the 2 cents that I would have there is that, we try to stay neutral when we look at any rating or review site out there. We take a look at the data, the facts, and what's in front of us. We have seen other review sites, as noted in this presentation, that are starting to become more prevalent. I think that Apartment Ratings is still a great site with a lot of good information on an apartment. The pay-to-play model for all of these ILSs, again, can be intimidating, a bit confusing. Sometimes seems like really, you need to be conscious about your budgets when there's so many out there. Because they are the number 2 site out there, I think it's very important to still be aware of what's being said online, specifically with that site. But looking at the data, there are a lot of other sources that are coming up with more online reviews. But keep in mind, if you look at that information, Apartment Ratings is still the number 2. Tough to really forecast what's coming in the future. Emma, did you have any thoughts on Apartment Ratings from your perspective?
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying. The only thing I would add is that since it's not a paid model for users, I would assume it would continue to be one of the highest ones. It's unfortunate you have to pay to respond, but I think it's still a good source for prospects and residents as they look for their apartment home. So I think it's still going to be really important.
Okay, thank you for that. And here's our next one. Also along the Apartment Ratings lines as well. What's the positive review threshold to justify positive ROI on Apartment Ratings, specifically for smaller property owners?
I can give a shot at responding there if I understand the question correctly. The positive review.
Yeah, George, it sounds like the question is basically how many positive reviews do you have to get on Apartment Ratings to justify that investment? That's what it sounds like our listener wants to know.
That's a good question. I hate to give this response, but it might even be worth giving Apartment Ratings a call and asking them what they think. There might be some bias there, right, with whatever they come back with, but might be worth giving them a call and discussing if you are one of those smaller property owners or companies to see what are their best practices, what do they typically see with other similar sized companies.
All right. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left, so we're going to get through as many of these questions as we can. And again, I want to remind our audience that if your question does not get answered here in real time, that George and Emma will be happy to follow up with you afterwards. So never fear. So here's the next one, though. In addition to reviews and star ratings, what are some more steps that one can take to enhance appeal?
Yeah,
Emma,
one of the
you're
things.
probably best suited to answer this. Yep. Sorry, go ahead.
Like George mentioned earlier, going to each of your listings and seeing how you appear, making sure the photos that are selected are the best ones possible, making sure all the information is up to date and accurate and filled out as much as possible. And that should probably be something that's just reviewed regularly to make sure that it, is as accurate and as appealing to the eye as possible.
Okay. And our next question actually should have some pretty broad interest and implications. The listener wants to know, in your experience, what social media platforms are most effective to engage prospective tenants?
I think that's going to vary wildly based on the demographics of the community, depending on who lives there and which platforms they're the most active on. If it's a younger crowd, it would be more Snapchat and Instagram. If it's an older one, probably more Facebook. So I think that one can really just wildly vary.
And here's another one about false, inaccurate reviews. When you know that a resident is posting a patently false review as retaliation for enforcement of lease provisions, let's say, is it ever a valid response to counter the review? And I guess maybe that gets even a little bit more into some legal considerations as well. But in any case, how about that? How would you approach that when you know that a resident is posting a review that's just patently false? And again, it's retaliation of some kind.
Yeah, I think when you get any type of review online that touches any liability or legality, it might be important, or it is important to involve your legal counsel just to get their eyes on it, get their thoughts on it, depending on the nature of that review. Discuss a game plan on the move forward or go forward approach. There can be some serious implications for any consumer out there leaving a false online review, which I think is going to get more press in the next. I mean, it's there now. I don't know. It's a world that I live in, so I see it quite frequently within our company in terms of news articles coming up. But I think it's going to get more press. We've seen some serious fines, imprisonment, some other things come up when leaving negative online reviews that are not true, kind of slandering the name of something. It goes against a lot of those policies online. Do consumers know what they're doing when they're posting that? Probably not. So I would say that it might be best to have a discussion with your legal counsel and then decide what's the best appropriate course of action, whether it be having a conversation with that resident if, again, you do know it's them, and this is a very sensitive, touchy subject, so take this lightly, always consult with your legal counsel, but sitting down with that resident and kind of discussing those issues, if you can, for sure, with 100% accuracy, know that it was a specific resident, then yeah, have the conversation with them offline if you can. But I think that getting your legal counsel's approach is best because that is a very serious topic that has some serious legal implications on the other side of the house. Emma, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, what you said is spot on for what we do internally, working closely with the legal teams. But the only other thing I would mention is being aware of your rights as far as removing reviews. A lot of platforms, don't make it easy, or it varies by platform to platform. But one that comes to mind is Google. If they're using swear words or calling someone by name specifically who works at your community, there are ways to get those reviews removed or flag them for removal, and Google will review them. And if it goes against their policy, they will take the review down as well.
Well, we have time for a couple more questions here. And along those lines of bad reviews, let's look at this from a slightly different perspective, if we could. There's certainly no shortage of multifamily properties that are trading hands these days. The market is pretty hot. And so the question then becomes, do either of you have any advice for overcoming bad reviews that remain from a previous management company that may be hanging on from the previous manager or previous owner? How about that? Any thoughts on overcoming bad reviews from the previous regime?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. This is something that's come up for us semi-regularly, and I think that the best course of action is just being honest and saying, I'm so sorry to hear that was your experience with, the previous management company, but we want things to be better and improve. And then, the standard thing I keep saying is, taking the conversation offline, asking them to give you a call, to stop by the office, and then following up and really listening to their concerns. Goes back to what was mentioned earlier this afternoon, as far as a lot of times they just want to be heard, and just knowing that you're there and are willing to listen and try to make things better can oftentimes get them to update or remove their review.
And let me bring up this question from an audience member as well, who wants to know, what are some of the most important hard skills a reputation manager should try to develop? And the listener really emphasized the hard skills aspect of that discipline. So, any thoughts on that?
I think that hard skills can have many interpretations, so I don't want to get that wrong. Emma, do you have
Fair enough.
any take on the hard skills needed? I don't know if that attendee wanted to chat for clarification, or if Emma, you had any insight into what they might be referring to.
Yeah, I'm not really sure I understand the question either, but I'd be happy to talk about it later.
Well, fair enough. That might be something that if you want to address privately with that member of the audience, that would probably be much appreciated, just to clarify the nature of what's meant by hard skills and with respect to the reputation management profession. So, well, let's see. I think we might have time for just one more quick question before we run. And Emma, could you mind telling us briefly, why did you choose social compass as an important element of your reputation management program?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started our search a few years back, and one of the biggest selling points for me was the fact that you only need one login to log into the Social Compass dashboard, and from there you can respond to all reviews across all the sites. With over 100 apartment communities and a small marketing team, it was really important to me that I wasn't fielding so many calls and emails for, what's my login to apartment ratings, or how do I access my Google listing, things like that. So the fact that it was one login was huge. And the fact that we got, alerts of new reviews several times a day to keep us on top of what was being said about us was also huge as well.
Well, thank you, Emma. And unfortunately, we are out of time for today. But once again, I really want to thank Emma Cook of Gene B. Glick Company and George Ledoux of Binary Fountain for being so generous in sharing their insights and their experiences on this very important issue. One final quick housekeeping note for our audience. I'd like to remind you all that you will receive a link to the recording of today's program, so you'll have an opportunity to listen to it again. And last but not least, I want to thank all of our listeners today for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.